All right, so we're on. Jared, thanks for joining. I know you're a busy guy, so appreciate the time that you put to do this podcast with me.
Always, buddy. Anything for you.
Appreciate it, man. So I'll jump right to the first question. I wanted to know what's your favorite movie and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not a fair question either, because I have so many. And I don't know. I think with music, movies, film, for me, it's a little similar in that oftentimes if I want to feel a certain way, I'll watch a certain type of movie. Or if I want to feel a certain way, I'll listen to a certain type of music. And so it's almost backwards than I think maybe other people do, where they're like, let's go watch this movie. And then they watch it and then they feel a certain type of way. I almost go backwards in that way. And maybe that's weird. Maybe that's not what other people do. But, so there's a lot of ways I want to feel sometimes. Sometimes I want to feel sad. Sometimes I want to feel confused. Sometimes I want to feel happy, energized. So generally speaking, I want to feel challenged by the film, by the medium that's in front of me, and I want to feel confused, and I want to laugh. And so there's an old school movie, and this is also back from my childhood. We, had little VHS tapes, and we had maybe 14 of them. And so we'd pick one and I'd watch it over and over and over again. And so one of them was called The Family Man. It's got Nicolas Cage. It's older. Not a lot of people would know about it. And it's certainly not one that's in his maybe top 5 in terms of being recognized. But The Family Man is very important to me. It represents childhood. It represents a film that I watch with my brother a lot. It's the dichotomy between choosing, an elite career that pays a lot of money, where you invest all of your time and energy into it and become quite successful. Wall Street, New York, make a lot of money. But what do you give up in the process? How joyful are you really? And he gets an opportunity to see what his life would have been like if he had not done that and had invested in a family and moved to the suburbs in Jersey and had a white picket fence and had a couple kids, and the complexities and how that differs. So, nobody gets that perspective, right? You make choices and you don't know how you would have felt if you were walking in your shoes, making a different choice in life. But in this movie, you get a chance to, and it's just super interesting. It affects me quite a bit. And Nick Cage is silly. He's funny. He's quirky. He's got crazy eyes. He's everything you want him to be. And so you laugh, but you're also like, oh my gosh, like it gets heavy. There's a young Don Cheadle, love Don Cheadle in it. And he plays a role you may not expect him to play. So it's a beautiful movie, man. The other one is called Little Man Tate, another old movie, young Jodie Foster. It's older. It's about this sort of savant, genius kid in the city. The soundtrack is amazing for its time. Ton of jazz, good jazz too. And it's complicated, and it's, what's the overlap between autism and genius? And, what's the other side of the spectrum? What are some of the mental issues that come with having such an enormous magnitude of intelligence? And it's a beautiful movie. So it brings you back to my childhood for sure.
Interesting. So Family Man and Little Man Tate. That Family Man is interesting because while you were explaining it, it kind of seems like a simulation as well, where you're able to try out different simulations and see how different decisions would kind of unfold themselves, right?
As an engineer, I love it, man. We study discrete event simulation, stochastic simulation, all these things, and but this is like real life, like this is how you would feel if all of a sudden you had 2 kids, a wife, a job, 9 to 5, take care, joy feels differently. Perhaps you obtain it differently through different types of lives, and your perception of joy and your capacity to receive joy in different ways. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you're not getting joy from your career anymore because you're investing in a family and you have to make a trade-off. That's very interesting to me, very salient for me in the world I live in.
Yeah, and it's and these types of things are all around us every day. The decisions that we make, and then we think about the opportunity cost, and then we think about what else we could have done, or what would have happened, things like that. So definitely interesting. So what about moving on to the next question? What is a good book that you would recommend if you were to recommend it to a loved one, a family, a friend?
Yeah, there's a lot. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I
Mhm.
love all of his stuff, but Outliers was a very pivotal book for me in my career. Um, I got I got joy from reading it, not just professionally, but just as a human. It's like that's how I think. Uh, we're in a strange time, and I like his angle on causality and probability and statistics, but done in a way that's not so complex that you can't actually see. So I don't know if you've read it or have gotten the audiobook, but he examines, socioeconomic. He examines events and how a lot of the small things, the accumulation of small things, the ripple effect of small things that, whether it's an underdog, whether it's a discrete action, how they combine, whether it's the year that, or the month that you were born in to be a hockey player in Canada, or, all these things where you wouldn't think of it at first, but it's like, oh, wow, like that's the ripple effect is this. And so I like how he addresses causality.
Mm.
It's a weird time right now because senior politicians and people, they make decisions. We do this for companies, right? We do massive transformations. And so causality is an interesting thing because so we do these four things and we expect this outcome. Now, at a discrete enough, a small enough level, it's easy to see causality, right? You're a member on a baseball team and you want to make the team, and you go through a regiment, which is work out, do these five things, or you got a recipe. You add these three things together, you add heat, boom, you see that immediately. But the world is complex. And so, when we implement a policy, a federal policy to address COVID and return to work or return to school, because there's millions of variables and it's very difficult to see causality or impact at a very high level. And I like how he addresses that in this book. It's challenged me, and it's really salient for what's going on right now, where nobody knows what to do with COVID and our response to this pandemic. I mean, you could take a side and make an argument that no matter what decision you make, you will be absolutely hated and you will be accused of killing people. And it's interesting to me, the thought process our senior leaders and other leaders politically within our school systems, within our organizations have to make to examine causality. If I do these three things, I expect an impact of this. Well, I like how he addresses in this book the linkage, the ripple effect. And that's why I like that book.
Interesting. A few things came to my mind. Although I've not read the entire book, I have a bad habit of leaving books half unread and coming back to them later. But one thing that you mentioned, it's almost like the causality you're talking about, I think of it as a second order thinking. So thinking of things through not just of what the first layer of consequences will be, but also the second layer. And then, really understanding which of these consequences have the highest probability of occurring, and then prioritizing your decisions based on that. Which is something that not a lot of people do. They only look at the first layer of consequences,
That's exactly right. I think back to a work example, which is, the change cycle, change management cycle. There's a lot, and I won't, there's many models of change, but when you're doing something of enormous change, the phenomenon that typically occurs is that it gets a lot worse before it gets better. Mm-hmm. If you're delivering real change. The scariest times for especially a consulting organization or somebody that's doing huge transformation, it could be, is when it's real comfortable and it seems like things are getting better little by little. That's a big issue. It often means that you're not doing it the right way. But when things are crazy and they're disheveled and people feel uncomfortable and they don't know what to do and they're scared and things get worse. It's often, that's the phenomenon that occurs in the change curve, that, you know, things are about to change for the better, hopefully. So when I talk about change, it's not necessarily good change or bad change, but any change, any big change, the phenomenon is typically, it gets worse before it gets better. And I always like that. And, you know, it's not even second order thinking for big socioeconomic things, which I think about because I'm a nerd at night and they give me anxiety, is like, what are the third order, the fourth, the 105th order interactions?
Yeah.
You know, I just think about, I think about needless suffering, right? And I know this is a heavy topic, so sorry to ruin your podcast, buddy, but, you know, like, why are there people that needlessly suffer? What's the purpose in that? I mean, it's real heavy. But then, you know, I also think about the times when the suffering that an individual can incur can inspire a person to change the way they view the world. You know, had an opportunity to do some work in Haiti, you know, some mission work a long time ago. And just the fact that we got a chance to see the poverty and a chance, I mean, you come back and you realize that you are selfish, you are arrogant, and you complain about things that people don't even have, and that they're creating joy in their lives from things that are, you know, completely trivial, at least in our opinion. And it's real powerful. And so when you look at that, if from the experience of experiencing someone suffering, you know, the ripple effect that you can have on hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives by challenging them to reconsider how we complain about the beautiful lives that we've been given, you know, that can impact thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives. And so is it needless suffering? Because the second, the third, the 100 order interactions, the ripple effect of that one human suffering can create beauty that's incomprehensible. So maybe it wasn't needless suffering. Maybe there was purpose in that. And I just love causality in that way, the ripple effects of small things and the complexities. And he addresses that in this book. He gives you a taste of it, and that's why I love it.
That's a really in-depth and interesting way to look at it. Full circle. You came back to the book. I almost forgot that we're talking about outliers. Which
what's outliers again?
It's that's an interesting analysis. So, what is your current Ikigai?
Yeah, good question. Heavy question too. You know, and I've heard this before. It's kind of as the nexus between what you love and what you're good at, which is different for a lot of people.
So Ikigai would be that intersection between, you know, four elements, right? So what you're good at, what the world needs, what you're passionate about, and what you can be paid to do. So the intersection of all of these four elements together would really be smack center your Ikigai, just as a visual, really. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. That, you know, and that's the fundamental question, right? For most of us, you know, why are we here? What's our purpose? You know, our Ikigai. You know, I think that my creator would put me here to, no matter what I touch, whether it's a person's life or a business problem, or me who has a lot of problems and a lot of things where I'm trying to improve, it's no matter what I come into contact with, it's to improve whatever that thing is. And that's what gives me joy, and that's what I'm particularly good at. Now, I'm good at some parts of that, not all, certainly. But I think doing that in parallel with making people laugh and making them feel better than they did before they encountered me as a human is my purpose, for sure.
That's very novel and interesting, and I can actually, you know, see that in you as well, in your interactions and the type of relationships that you want to build with people. You do, you know, you do aim to go there. You do aim to have richer relationships. And actually, one thing that I do appreciate is, the way that you're able to express it too, because being able to express the thoughts, the feelings that's on your mind is also another very important thing, because it's two separate things, right? What you're thinking, what you're feeling versus how you're also able to express it. So the more you're able to close this gap between the two, the more accuracy you would have in that expression.
Well, thanks, Riz. And my ability to communicate, it can be long-winded at times, for sure. And I'm probably only doing justice to 15% of it. But, that's the challenge we all have in terms of articulating our purpose or figuring out what our purpose is.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think, a life spent not seeking this out is certainly not a life that I want. So it's top of mind, and I think it should be top of mind for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So what new skills are you trying to learn right now?
Well, I think my particular career path has had some pros and cons. The pros have outweighed the cons 98% to 2%, but the cons are still there. And I always love the quote that, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything. And we have a finite amount of life's energy that we've been given, finite amount of hours. And you have to make choices. And I've made some choices on the career side that have resulted in, and also through some lack of discipline, some unhealthy habits, right? So recently, I'm working on discipline with regard to food, with regard to my intake. I just hit 50 pounds lost. But, that lifestyle of being on the road 100%, it's possible. There are people that do it. They're far better than I am that have been able to do that and be healthy and well mentally and physically. But for me, I have not been able to do that. I've not been disciplined. It's taken a toll on my body. And so I'm fixing it. That's what I'm working on. And I'm making good progress. But it's tricky because, food, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's, whatever your vice is, it's funny how you learn things about yourself, through the process of discipline. I'm finding that, long consulting career, you get on the road, you get back to the hotel, you work 14 hours today, you haven't eaten much, and you have a big meal, right? It's a reward. The sugar, it creates bursts of the ratios of norepinephrine and dopamine, and you get a rush and you feel good, right? And so, it's funny how over time that no matter what it is, simple things, TV, your intake of social media, the things that create bursts of chemicals that make you feel good as a reward category. For me, it was food and that lack of discipline, how I viewed nutrition. And so as I improved those things through the help of all the people that care about me in my life, it pays dividends. I have more energy. And you start to realize, that's just, everybody has their thing. That's their vice. Some people, it may be, unfortunately, it could be drugs or something, but it's always that sort of same thing. And so for me, that's what I'm fixing in my life right now.
Good for you. And yeah, you're right. Everyone has their battles, right? I guess the whole point of existing is to, one by one, eliminate these obstacles or challenges that are in your way. And some might be harder than others. So what's your biggest fear?
Anything happening to a family member or loved one. And, that's number one. I would say that's probably similar for a lot of people, but anything, negative that could impact a family member or loved one, somebody I care about is scary. Thinking about not having somebody that you love. Did I cherish them enough? That's tough. I think, on a less heavy note, still probably heavy, I worry, the iceberg principle. I worry that there's 90% of a massive iceberg below the ocean in my life that people see, but I don't. Crashes the ship. So I really like the notion of reality, and what our perception of reality, and absolutism versus relativism. They're interesting topics for me, but it would be very scary for me to have something big going on that nobody had the heart to tell me, that I was too nice of a guy for somebody to give me some feedback and say, hey man, you got to watch out. And look, it's probably an irrational fear because I have some of the best friends and some people that love me dearly and who tell me the brutal truth because it hurts. And that's how you get better at things. But I still worry, like, I am a nice guy. I'm a sweetheart. I am. And so sometimes people don't want to tell you something like, hey man, your health has gotten a bit out of control, or maybe you could do this. I always worry about that. I worry that there's something big that we can't see. And it could be that other people couldn't see it either. We're too immersed in it. We're not close enough to it. So I worry about that. I think, and look, it's hard. I think a physical ailment versus a mental ailment. I think a mental ailment could be quite bad, because especially if your perception of reality is different than others in a way where you're not perceiving all of it, that's a very scary thing.
Yeah, it can be a very lonely place as well if you're there.
Yeah, and the scary part is that this happens. Depression happens. People's thyroid disorders and the way that some of the chemicals, people feel sadness, even though the reality has not changed. People view an event and they view it differently because of those types of things. And people go through ups and downs. And so to me, that's scary. To me, perceiving reality in a negative way because of something is very scary. When there's others who are saying, this life is amazing. We've been given so much. We've been blessed. And sometimes you have to choose to have joy and choose to enjoy things and view it differently, even though you don't feel like it. So,
interesting.
Anyways,
and regarding,
I know this is probably heavy. Sorry, Chris.
No. I mean, it should be heavy, right? The title of the podcast is Past the Small Talk. So we want to get past the small talk and get into more heavy stuff. What you said about your family and your loved ones as well. I read this beautiful quote. It was like, spend more time with people who are going to be at your funeral, which is also something to think about, right? So, not a lot of people that we interact with are necessarily the right people that we should be interacting with, where we have our loved ones we're not taking care of, or maybe we haven't called them in some time or spent time with them. I think it's always important to keep that in mind as well. Priorities, right? How do you deal with your insecurities?
Well, sometimes I don't. And sometimes insecurities for me can feel like 36 unresolved loops of potential situations in my brain that are unresolved. And that's sometimes what others would call anxiety, right? And so that can create insecurities, because my brain, and like I described, if my purpose, my Ikigai is to solve problems and improve and better things, then when something's not solved, it can create stress, and that can create an insecurity with me, because why am I not doing the thing that I was given purpose to do? And so sometimes they don't go resolved. And I think a lot of people experience this, especially recently, being so isolated. We're within our thoughts. We have less outlets to just hash it out and say all the things that we're worried about. And so we keep them inside. And so oftentimes they don't go resolved, and you can't sleep, and and your brain's clouded, and your performance goes down, and you can't communicate effectively. So sometimes, frankly, Reza, they don't get resolved, and it's tough. And then there are other times where through prayer, through meditation, for me, it's been working out through the science of quite like making your mind quiet, classic meditation, whether it's transcendental meditation, whether it's spiritual prayer, could be painting, it could be art. I'm really not good at art, I would say, but I remember with my aunt, it was so great just doing this little paint night pre-COVID. And there's 3 hours of me making a painting that I didn't love. And I felt unbelievable joy after that, because during that 3 hour time period, I was focused on one thing. And for your brain to have one thing to focus on is very relieving, when normally you've got all these things clogging up your brain. And so I think that one of the ways I deal with those insecurities or those parallel thoughts is through acts of mindfulness, acts of meditation, and they come in different forms. It's not necessarily, the perception of meditating quietly for an hour. They come in different mediums. I found tremendous joy out of working out, even though it kind of sucks. It's hard. You're breathing heavily, but the fact that you're focused on one thing. There's a lot of I'm learning from people that are elite marathon runners and others that their ability to focus on one thing, even trivial or small, gives them the ability to focus. So I do the best I can, but those are some of the ways that I deal with some of my insecurities or perhaps anxiety.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. There's so many different stimuli, all the time we're thinking about. And it definitely does help to kind of stop and just focus on one thing, just be in a state of flow with one activity that you're doing, because it kind of mutes all the background noise that is usually there, always running in our minds.
Yeah, man.
What are some red flags for you in relationships? It can be intimate, it can be a business relationship, or whatever else,
Yeah, well, wouldn't consider myself necessarily great at, intimate relationships. So the red flag would probably be me in that case, because I wouldn't consider myself great at them. Not a tremendous amount of experience, again, going back to choice points, right? So I'm not in one place a lot, especially pre-COVID, traveling a lot. And, hard to generate the consistent relation. It's hard enough just to keep great relationships with your closest friend and your families. So I would say that with regard to those types of relationships, the red flag would be me, because I probably haven't come across as available, as authentic, as, giving it the time and energy to do it right. It's just one of the drawbacks, and I look forward to changing that. I'd say with regard to others, and that's why when you say red flags, I typically look inwards first. I don't think we're victims. We get choices to interact with who we want to interact with, and to put people in our lives, and to go after people that emulate our values. And so that's why the red flag is normally I look inwards first, because I could be projecting or creating an outcome in my relationships that's just a reflection of me and my insecurities and other areas in my life that aren't where I want it to be. So, but when I am working with people, it's really just generating trust at the fastest possible level, and the red flags are people that I lose trust with me, or I lose trust with, so what can you count on somebody for? What are you committed to? It's a good analogy, but it's like a bank, trust is like a bank account. There's people that make withdrawals, or people make deposits. It's a good analogy. You show up 5 minutes late for a meeting, your buddy cancels on you last minute, whether we say it or not, subconsciously, you lose a little bit of trust, you gain a little bit of trust. You got my back on something, wow, gain trust. So there's kind of a bank account, right? Everybody's got a number in there. And so the people that tend to either eliminate or tend not to interact with are people that it's just, I don't know what I can count on them for.
I would say with the bank account analogy, it's just a lot easier to make withdrawals than to make deposits.
That's so interesting. And everybody, even culturally, there are differences by which the speed of trust occurs. And I've had a chance to see that. And I'm not going to make large scale cultural inferences, because everyone's different in that way. But I've noticed there are some people that you have their immediate trust. And you get to know things about them that are heavy, that are deep, that are things they wouldn't tell a stranger. But the first time you make a withdrawal, so maybe your bank account's $1 million, right, of trust. But the first time, they're 2 minutes later, something happens, there's a fragility there, it just dissolves, right?
Mm.
But then there's others who, it takes 30 years of knowing somebody for them to have the heart to tell you something, because you've earned trust over 30 years and now they feel comfortable with you. And so there's so many different types of ways that people develop that trust. The rate by which they develop it is very different. And that plays takes a toll sometimes on people expecting more out of their close friends when you haven't earned the right to hear that story because you haven't been with them 20 years in the trenches of a friendship. And so our expectations of people it's hard, we project our expectations on developing trust faster on other people because of the way we generate trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been interesting for me. I've been humbled in many ways where it's like, man, I've told you everything there is to know about my life. You know everything about me. Why do you not trust me enough? And that's a projection of me on them. Some people just require 30 years in the trenches and you get to feel it. You get that bond. It's interesting.
Very true. Very true. And Speed of Trust is a good book too. Talked about, speed of trust.
100%.
Definitely interesting. So if you could have lunch, dinner, or whatever with someone dead or alive, who would it be?
My brother, my mom, my dad, family member. And, look, we talked earlier. I know that's probably not the sexiest response, but
We're not looking for sexy responses.
if on our deathbed, am I going to think about the one time that I had lunch with Abraham Lincoln, who's spilling coffee in his massive beard, trying to relate with him in a context, in a setting? I mean, I'm going to think about the times where I had amazing interactions with the people whom I love the most and who love me the most, which was my brother, my mom, my dad, my family, my closest friends, my boss, just the most important people. I just take an extra day with the most important people because why not? Some random weird interaction with Albert Einstein who can't even form a coherent sentence that I can even understand. I mean, look, there's some cool people. Do I want to talk with Elon Musk on the future of what AI looks like? That would be freaking awesome, but I still would choose my family.
That's respectable, man. That's definitely respectable. What do you think, talking about Elon Musk and Einstein, what do you think is the most important invention of the 21st century? And don't say the internet, please.
Well, what I think it is I think that it's algorithms and tracking mechanisms that provide data on the content that we as humans experience through social media, through television, through any media outlet. And stay with me on this because it's probably a bit strange, but I believe that you could make the argument we live in a fairly strange, and I'd even say a dark time with regard to media. The quality of the data that supports what we see, what programming exists for us, clickbait. I mean, how many things do you have to click through that are just garbage that you don't want to fill your mind with? And what I think is interesting is I think that through the last 20 years or so of receiving data that we never had before about human behavior, about the consumption of media, about what you have open at midnight on your iPhone, what you're scrolling through and what you're looking at in the privacy and secrecy of your own home. The data that's formed based on you viewing those things has created a machine that regurgitates and acts as a mirror of our humanity and thus fuels what we see in our media. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the most important thing. It's just that I don't know that we've realized it yet, is that our media, that the clickbait, that the Kardashian video, that whatever whatever we're seeing is a mirror of who we are in our hearts, truly. Because in the privacy of our homes, we may be a certain way or act a certain way outside of that, but in the privacy of our homes, some people's true intentions come out. This is what gives them joy. This is what they want to see. And so that's why I think it's important, because I think that as we learn and as we frankly get a little scared of what we've created, I think we'll be able to change that machine. There's a lot, I hear so much feedback as to why political debates are the way they are structurally, and how, especially in the US, why certain candidates exist and others don't, and the machine that fuels that, and why we have fake news and why we have clickbait. And I think it's easy to become a victim and say, yeah, we've got reporters or people who desire money, and the money is coming through clicks. But at the end of the day, if you want to change what you see within your media, we have to change what we're interested in seeing. We have to not click that thing. And so I think there's a massive behavioral change in humanity, in the hearts of people, to have discipline around what we put into our minds to change that machine of media, because I don't think it's going to decrease. We have too much technology and too many mediums to receive it. So the only thing we can really change is the quality of what we receive, and whether that gives us joy, whether it makes us better humans. And so that's why I think, as trivial as it is, I think that's the most important invention, because of what we could do and what that mirror shows us that we really are as a humanity.
You know what, man, I really appreciate this answer, because, when you first started with, what you were talking about, I was like, isn't that a bad thing? I mean, we're talking about privacy. We're talking about how corporations are using all of the metadata that we provide them to track our lives, our patterns, what we do, what we consume, really. And you put such an interesting perspective on this is, hey, whatever you're seeing on your Facebook feed, on your Instagram feed, is really a reflection of your truest self, because at the privacy of your own house, this is literally what you're consuming. So here you go. This is all of you. And that's really interesting, because you're able to understand yourself. Like you said, it's a mirror. So that's cool. That's an interesting perspective.
And I don't want to be unfair, because not everybody clicks on clickbait. And so I'm not trying to say that they are a reflection. I'm saying that humanity in its aggregate form, the fact that it exists means that there are populations of people who desire that and click on that.
Yeah.
And therefore it shows up. And the fact that a machine that exists can create and be compensated through that means that people are incentivized to create more content like that. And so I don't want to be unfair in that regard. I mean, sometimes I show up on Instagram, and because of my Amazon search history, they show me something and I'm like, I really want that. And then I go buy it. Like, how did they know? That's genius. Thank you for that. So it's powerful, but it can be used in a very powerful way, either good or bad, in terms of how we choose and what our browser history is and what we use our precious time with. And so
definitely,
I think we have to see a change in our hearts before we see a change in the types of media that we're given. We're not victims. This is on us.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was listening to one of Joe Rogan's podcasts. He was talking to this neuroscientist, and the neuroscientist was saying how currently at this stage in humanity, with the technology that we have, we're still in our adolescence period, because we don't really know what we're doing with this massive machine that we've built, and some of the consequences or repercussions that it might have later down the road. So I think as the generations, move forward, looking at it from a positive perspective, we will be able to use all of these powerful machines to our advantage to actually improve humanity. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, I think, yeah, that would be great. but with that power also comes responsibility, because we could do some really bad things.
Definitely, that we can do really bad things. Definitely.
Yeah. The
So,
philosophy of AI is a very interesting topic. Probably not for this podcast, but that's
well,
very
we can
interesting.
have future podcasts on that as well because you have interesting
Yeah,
perspectives. I appreciate it.
we should.
Moving on from the negative side of obviously technology and the future, but what about the future excites you?
Hmm. I think the future in and of itself is exciting. Some of the unknowns, I tend to be a planner. We, as engineers, we tend to look at causality through statistics, and we do this, and this is the effect that we get. And so, yeah, I got a vision, I got a roadmap, I got things that I believe. I believe I'm going to do these 6 things, and I'm going to lose 40 more pounds. I believe I'm going. So there's all that, and I'm excited about what that's going to create in terms of getting me to my vision. But I'm also excited about the things that, some of the most wonderful and joyful people in my life are the people that are unpredictable. I need that. Like, not everything could be planned out to a T.
You need
You
a little
need
bit of a
volatility.
chaos, right?
You need some chaos. I need some chaos, even though I hate it and I don't like disorganized things. That's a recipe for me to just get into my little routine and never be challenged and control everything. And I need those out of control things in my life. I need those people challenging me, those wild cards, those unexpected conversations. I look forward to that, even though I dread it a little bit, because left to my own devices, it's the notion of entropy, right? Like
Yeah.
entropy in systems, systems left to their own device, unchecked, without any energy injected into them, naturally dissipate. They naturally
Yeah.
fail. And I believe as humans, it's the same type of deal. Left to our own devices, we are engineered to decompose. And so I need, I've got a game plan and I have a very specific vision, and I love that vision and that, but I need chaos, and I need, whether it's by my own doing or by someone else's. And I've had beautiful people put in my life that have challenged me in that way. Just sit back and kind of laugh. So I'm excited about the future that through my actions will be created, and the future that through others and through are going to give me probably even more joy. I look forward to, got some big things coming up, and forward to maybe staying in one place a little bit more than traveling. COVID has taught me and kind of helped me relearn the power of discipline, the power of process, the power of doing the same thing every day, getting up, versus being on the road and traveling all the time, being in a different city and learning different cultures. And so I look forward to a future that maybe has a little bit more of that, maybe a family, my own family.
That's fair. That's fair. Good answer. What do you have any questions for me?
I got a million questions.
Okay. Let's do it.
Well, I was curious. What's the biggest thing in your life right now that's holding you back from your dream? Is it the dream itself, coming up with what you really want? Or is it the how, the mechanism? Or is it a combination of both?
I would say it's definitely a combination of both, but I think that one thing that's generally holding me back, if anything, would be my own mind. So myself, really, because I think that it's an excuse and it's a cheap shot to point out at external things outside of yourself to say it's their fault, or it's whoever person's fault, or whatever thing's fault. So I would say it's myself, and there's so many different ways that I try to get around that by understanding myself more, by figuring out different patterns that I might fall into that might stop me from getting what I want, or even really journaling and going back to understanding why I am the way I am, thinking about my early years, thinking about my teenage years, understanding the people that I hung out with, some of the positive and negative tendencies in my family and how those affected me, things like that. And I think the more that I understand that, the easier it is for me to label and note down different patterns that might come up once in a while that might stop me from achieving what I want to achieve.
Well, I respect you enormously because the amount that you take on mentally and the amount that you process is enormous. Maybe even in an unfair way, but I think it's healthy at the same time because you don't accept the status quo. You're not just blindly going about things. You're processing things at a very high level and doing it in a broad sense too. But and you also recognize that if you just do that, you can be a wonderful philosopher and not do anything at all. So I respect you enormously in that, and thanks for your honesty there. I was curious.
One thing before you move on that, Jared, is this whole thing about us thinking about ourselves and our own minds and problems in and of itself, I think is a luxury, because not a lot of people are actually able to do that. You look back home, let's say in the Middle East right now, people are actually having trouble bringing food to the table. So, I don't think someone who has trouble bringing food to the table or having a bed to sleep on would have the luxury to think about their thoughts. So I think even the fact that we are in this position to think about our thoughts, ourselves, our future, be able to set plans and make plans for even a year in advance, because we need stability for that. I think that in and of itself is a luxury.
You're so right. Isn't it funny how some of those folks that do struggle, whose singular focus is to put food on the table, sometimes tend to be the most joyful people than the people that have everything that they've ever wanted and just have a ton of time to think about it. Yeah. It's funny
definitely
how selfish we are sometimes. I appreciate your humility in that. I was curious, I just looked behind you and I've loved going through your Instagram stories and all the, you have so many different mediums for art, for getting down either verbally or on paper or in writing or through, you have a lot of mediums that you use. I consider you an artist, even though, we're engineers and we came up as, we're working together in consulting, and you're amazing at what you do, but you're an artist as well. And I've always been fascinated by that because I don't know that I have that desire to get something out of my head and articulate that on paper for others to consume. I just don't have that muscle, and you do, and I think it's brilliant. So, why do you sometimes feel the need to take something that you're processing and create art out of it? Like what's the why? Because it's beautiful.
That's a thank you, by the way, and that's a very good question, because I think whether you're whether you're an engineer, you identify as a dolphin, whatever it is that you think you are, I think art is something that should be part of everyone's life in a sense, because it gives you that space to not be so structured and give you that space to just, flow freely in your thoughts, which again, is a luxury in some way. And the reason I do it is because sometimes I'm not able to express what is really on my mind to another person through words, let's say, but I can do that if I sit down and write something, if I draw something, and at least have or send out something to the world in such a way that it might create an emotion in someone else, help them in some way. Maybe they're going through something similar. Maybe they find inspiration in what I'm saying in a way that might be able to help them. And then, the butterfly effect, they go on and do something else. So the whole, I wouldn't say there is a reason that I'm doing this. It's mostly for myself, because I have this need to express myself in whatever way that I can. And then that's the first order. And then the second order would really be, if it helps someone, then great. If it inspires or creates an emotion, then great,
Yeah, it's cool to see that, because I think one of the most vulnerable moments you could have. I mean, you're creating something and you don't know how people are going to react. People could look at this and feel incredibly depressed because you can't control how they view it. And so I appreciate that because I don't know that I have that muscle. I also have the insecurity of, releasing something out into the world that somebody might not like. There's insecurity in that, but it sounds like you've gotten freedom and liberation just in putting something out there, not knowing how it's going to be impacted, especially in a divisive world where it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, there's going to be hate, there's going to be downvotes, there's going to be misinterpretation, there's going to be purposeful and ignorant misinterpretation of those things. So I just I like that you do it, and I respect it, and I just I don't. It's hard for me to wrap my head around people that have that muscle, especially musicians.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
I really think that you find inspiration in other people as well. Obviously one of my inspirations in this regard is someone like Kanye, or even someone like my friend, like Masood. You haven't met him, but he's also one of those guys that showed me a different perspective on how, you can go about either creating or expressing yourself in certain ways. So the people around you matter as well. And like you said, that liberation, you still feel a little fear on many things. It's not that I am able to express myself fully, because some things I'm sure if I write out on social media, I might, get fired, or I don't know, I really don't know what's going to happen, but either way, it's good to slowly integrate yourself as much as you can with the people around you. And the more you're able to do that, the better, because then you don't really have that, split personality. One person when you are yourself, by yourself, and then one person where you're with other people. You don't really want that,
It's a lot of energy to manage that, those separate beings inside of our soul, right? And so if they're not separate, then tremendous liberation in that. And I like that too, because like I mentioned earlier, anxiety, those parallel and perpendicular and looped thoughts that are unresolved. I mean, that's perhaps one of the definitions of anxiety. And getting it out there through a medium like art, like music, like is probably resolution and liberation in and of itself for you, because you don't have to hold on to all this stuff. It's manifesting itself through the medium you choose. And while I'm not an artist per se, I saw a little bit. I got a little glimpse of that when you're spending 3-4 hours on something. Maybe just subconsciously, it's coming out some way. It's a reflection of how you're feeling, and there's liberation in that. So, anyways, I appreciate that response.
And I urge you to continue doing that, Jared. Whether you consider yourself an engineer or whatever else, I don't think we need to put labels on ourselves. You're Jared. You're not a consultant or an engineer or what. You are everything. And the more you're able to expand that territory that you operate in, I think that the more rich your perspective will be in regards to different topics and different subjects.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Right. Man, I've got a million other questions, but
no, that's cool.
Save it for another day, another podcast.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate the time. I know you're really busy as well. It's a busy time. So thanks for joining. It was a pleasure talking with you, and looking forward to more, episodes together.
You got it, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared.